Be the Voice blog where we keep it real here. I have today Miss Donna Jackson Maldonado. And today we're just going to keep it real and we're going to just talk about our past and different struggles and the challenges and the overcoming that we have, obstacles that we have come through just by the grace of God. And the first question I'm going to ask you, Donna, is I've been knowing you for what, over
20 years.
20 years?
Yeah, 22 years, something like that.
22 years.
Wait, Jockey is about 21 years.
About 21 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I say for myself, I've kind of went through a lot of struggles in my life. I've overcome domestic violence and drug addiction and various things that have kind of kept me captive in my progress in life and living abundantly. But like yourself, ever since I've known you, you've always been in recovery. How were you able to maintain your sobriety and still go through the challenges that we face in life?
Well, first, God. Um, but when I decided that I wasn't getting high anymore, I was done. I just knew that I never wanted to get high again because I, what made me decide that I was going to stop getting high it was Easter Sunday. And I had been out on a 2-day binge, walking up the street. It had to be about 8 o'clock in the morning. I didn't even realize that it was Easter Sunday. And I happened to look across the street, and all my kids was dressed up in their Easter outfits, sitting on the front porch.
Mm-hmm.
And the shame that came over me, because I didn't want them to see me like that, and me ducking from my children. Um, Something inside of me moved that said, not only do they need me as their mother, I need to be their mother.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was a piece in me that actually needed to be their mother. So once I decided that that was that and it was over, I realized that any problems that I had those problems while I was doing the drugs. And the drugs didn't help it. It made it worse. It compounded it because the problems never went away. They were still there. And I just added another problem. So when I said I'm done with the drugs, I was truly done because any other problems that I needed to face couldn't get any worse. It had to be somewhat better because I had removed one of the problems.
Would you
So,
say that that was the biggest problem? I mean, that was a symptom of the problem, right? The drugs may have been the symptom versus the actual problem. Because when we look, I know for myself, when I look back over my life and say, well, what was causing, what was the driving force that caused me to need or have to search out something to alter my personality, to alter the way I think, to alter my feelings, so that I wouldn't have to cope or deal with the things that was going on with me. So the thing that I chose was that, okay, well, I know that for a minute or for an hour I can escape through that high. What things were going on with you in your life that would cause you to want to even go for that drug?
well, first, let me say that you're absolutely right. The drugs were a band aid or a temporary fix to other underlying issues that had already been going on. Then one thing was youth. Okay, in youth, we don't. Most young people think we're gonna live forever. Okay, so that right there is one of the circumstances that allowed me to stay stuck on that drug thing at that point in time because it I wasn't thinking about anything else. It was
So
all
you
about
thought maybe you had enough time to get yourself together,
it was
that I could
all
have my
about
fun
me,
and do what
right?
I'm
It
doing.
was all about me, and like I see it when I stopped for the first time, I actually thought about somebody outside of me.
Yeah. So you saw
Okay,
your children.
right,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. So that was the first thing. Yes, after I put down the drug and I began a process of going through the recovery and dealing with people who were in recovery and other friends and people who were in different churches and believed some of the same things that my grandmother had instilled in me. I began to understand after I put down the drug, that I was still hurting about the molestation, the abandonment issues I had from my parents. I never knew my dad. I still don't know my dad to this day. Okay. My mom abandoning me when I told her that her boyfriend molested me. She called me everything but a child of God and took his side. You know, I realized that I still had all these hurts from then, and then my life, the things that I had been shown by my mother, had me believing that relationships were supposed to be abusive. You know what I'm saying? I remember as a child sitting downstairs with my sisters, and we'd all be huddled up listening to my mom get beat up upstairs. And one day, me and my sister right under me, we decided we was gonna go upstairs. We went in the kitchen. We got knives. We go upstairs. We bust in the room. She told us she laying on the floor, telling us to get the hell out because that was her man. Okay. I remember times that she would have us call cabs to come and get us, and we thinking finally it's gonna be over.
Hmm.
We go to a hotel within an hour or so. She'd have one of us call him back, and she's apologizing so that we can go back to the house. You know, so as a child, once I grew into it, I remember as a child saying how crazy she was, and this is not, this is chaotic and all. And then as an adult, I found myself repeating the same things that I had seen my mom do because I had never had any other example on what was supposed to be
The
a
norm.
healthy thing.
Hmm.
Okay.
When I talk to certain people, I can name a through and a few come to mind where they have been living in the same situation. People say that they are a product of their environment.
Hmm.
Where myself and my siblings, when we grew up, my sister, we grew up with my grandmother, and there was a time where myself and my brother, we were with my mother, and a chain of events occurred, and my brother and myself were taken from my mother, and we were placed with my grandmother. Now, my sister, she always was with my grandmother, and she had a certain foundation, a certain uh, she had a certain support group from my mother's sisters and my grandmother, even though she had always lived with my grandmother, where the avenue that she took led her to success. And she has a beautiful career. She has a productive lifestyle. She a wonderful husband, marriage. Um, but myself, I can honestly say that when I used to compare myself to why was it that I was the one that had to choose that route. Now I was 7, around the age of 7 when I moved with my grandmother, but I was young enough to be able to be turned from the things that I saw my mother do. You talked about seeing your mother in an abusive relationship. At that particular time, I never saw my mother in an abusive relationship before she was taken, but she was young when she had us, and she just liked to go out. She enjoyed partying, and she did care about us, and she took care of us. Like we ate, we slept, but she just had this need to always go out and party. So one particular evening, she left us with um, our cousin, and I guess my grandmother had gotten whiff of it, and she just had too much, and she came up and she took my brother and and myself from my mother's home. And the next day, when my mother came back from going out on the town, she came to get us from my grandmother, and that was the point, I can honestly say, in my life where I saw how issues where it comes to neglect of a child, or certain lifestyles can get you hemmed up and caught up in the grip, because my grandmother refused. It was almost like she had already had my sister, and she saw where my brother and myself was going to head. So she pulled us from that grip. But honestly, I had resentments toward my grandmother, because I was like, she could have just let us stay, because when my mother came back to get us, she refused. There was nothing that my mother could say. All my grandmother continued to say was unfit, and all I heard that word unfit, kind of echoed. it echoed in my mind for a very long time. So I always felt with that word unfit, I always felt like I didn't fit because I was that was my mother. And when you see my mother, you see me, or when you see me, you see my mother. You know, so um, soon, not too much along down the road, but soon after that, I kind of like those resentment feelings left from my grandmother because even when my grandmother took us, my mother had the opportunity to come and see us more than she did, but she just it was just not in her at that particular time. She just like she enjoyed partying. She enjoyed the nightlife, and that's what she did. As I got older, I got pregnant when I was about 15 years old, and I went back to live with my mother. Then that's when I began to see the abuse. I began to see the abuse of being in an abusive relationship, and countless times where hospital visits, and I used to look at that and I would say to myself, I would never get to the point where I would allow another man to abuse me like that, especially not in front of my children. Now, you were talking about the abuse and seeing your mother, being abused. Had you ever had those feelings that you would protect your children, you would guard your children from seeing that type of chaos going on, so that they wouldn't have to go through the same things that you went through?
Well, a lot of what you said, what struck me and what you were saying is the grandmother piece, because it was my grandmother that came to me and my siblings' rescue as well.
Hmm.
I was the one that my mom actually left with my grandmother. I was the one who got more of my grandmother's influence than any of my siblings, my brothers and my sisters. And strange, you talk about Lorianne and your sister, and how that affected her. Out of all of my mother's children, I'm the one who the world would deem is the most successful one,
Hmm.
because I did get the see. What I learned in that realm is that you got youth versus age and maturity. In youth, we do foolish things. This is it even states in the Bible. Okay, I'm a Christian. I read the Bible. In the Bible, it talks about you hear um, Job in the Bible. Okay, say, God, don't hold against me what it is that I did in my youth,
Hmm.
because in youth we do foolish things. Most of us, or I can't even say most of us, I would say some of us, as we grow and mature, we do collect that wisdom from the different experiences that we have, and we learn differently. The stories that I heard about my grandmother from her children and people that knew her, I don't know that person, because who I know as my grandmother is that wise, gray haired old lady who would never let anything happen to me or my siblings. Okay, so that I wanted to point out that as we grow older, we should be maturing and learning from the mistakes that we make. However, some people don't. Now, when you ask me about did I ever think to protect my children to do different than my mother? Yes. And the more that I grew up and matured, the more I strived to do exactly that. I was never long term out in the world. I was never I did drugs. I smoked crack cocaine. I smoked weed. I drank. I did all of that stuff. But I did all of that stuff in a period of 18 months to 2 years. It was like I just consumed as much as I could in this crash period of time. And then I just decided that enough was enough. I have responsibility, my children. Okay. Um, I decided that I was not going to be like my mother. Even to this day, my mother is 64 years old, still doing drugs, alcohol. She's chasing men, the whole nine. Okay? Some people don't learn, some people don't change. What I had to learn to do was accept her and love her for who she is. That has been a catalyst with me for my entire life, the way I live my entire life. I've learned first, first I must say, I first had to get angry with my mother. I first had to acknowledge the resentments I had towards her because I never resented my grandmother. I always knew my grandmother loved me. I always knew that everything she did was out of love for me. Okay. Um, I was angry with my grandmother at one time because I would hear her talking negative about my mom.
Mhm.
But as I grew up and grew older, I began to realize that, and I've said it to my mother, she wasn't lying. She shouldn't allow the 5, 6, 7, 10-year-old child to hear her say these things. But the reality of the situation is, if I put all of the little things like she shouldn't allow the child to hear them, the major part of it is she was telling the truth. She was not lying.
Okay, so in speaking of that, now I know I had my own skeletons, and I've had my own um, uh, things that I had to overcome, where my daughter would bring up, because you talked about it not being out there that long, but there was a period of time where in your conscious, in your spirit, man, something quickens you and said, hold on, wait a minute, I got to get myself together. I got to live for my kids.
Mhm.
I can't continue to allow my kids to see me looking like this. And children know. They
Mhm.
know when there's something
Mhm.
wrong with her,
Mhm.
and they love you. Children, you talk about the youth, and children love you unconditionally. So
Mhm.
those resentment feelings, like where you're talking about someone that I love, and that's my
Mhm.
mother.
Mhm.
But how were you able to deal with it? Was there ever a time where your children would throw back in your face what you
Mhm.
used to do? How was you able to deal with that?
Well, first of all, I had already forgiven myself. I had already went to God. I had already, prayed his forgiveness. I had already allowed him to search my heart, show me my heart. I had already allowed him into my heart before I went to my children to make any amends. So by the time I got to my children, especially my oldest son, because he was the oldest, he saw more
Hmm.
or remembered more
Hmm.
than the other ones. And he is the type of child where if you allow him to hold you hostage, he would have held me hostage. And I had my son at 16. Okay, so I was a child having a child. But even as a child having a child, I promised myself, I promised my children and God that I would never allow my children to go through the same things that me and my siblings went through with my mom. So that was one of the catalysts that made me decide that, okay, enough, this is enough, and I need to get on being a mother to these children, okay? Um, but once I gave it all up, yeah, my son came at me with, he saw me doing this, he saw me doing that, and I set him down. Me and him, actually, I put him in the car, and me and him went for a ride, just me and him. And how I explained it to him was, I started from the beginning. First of all, baby, I was a baby having babies. Okay, I was 16 years old. All of my children know my history. They already know that I came from abuse with my mother and, neglect, so on and so forth. Okay, they also know that my grandmother was my mother, per se. So they knew about the sexual molestation. They knew about these things. So I went from a child having a child to a child having a child that's still dealing with demons of her own from childhood. Okay. And I explained it to my child in this exact nature. It was not time for me to sit down and talk to him like he was a child because I wasn't thinking about him being a child when he saw those things that he saw when I was doing what I was doing. Okay. So I explained it to him like this. Yes, I did all of these things. Bottom line of it is, mommy was wrong. I'm sorry from my heart. I would give my life for you. I would never do anything with intent to hurt you. It was about me trying to stop my own hurt. And once I did that and did it with sincerity and made him aware that it was as sincere as I could be, and I was assured that he was aware. The next time he tried to come back at me with throwing things up in my face, because see, what children do, they only bring up certain things when they want certain things. Okay? So once I picked up on that piece, it was like this: look, you're not holding me hostage. Plain and simple. You're just not. Okay, I did what I did. I apologize. What's done is done. I'm now living this life. Okay, either you can join me and be a part of this life, or I got to leave you back there where you want to stay. I chose not to be there anymore. So I'm not going to allow you to keep taking me back there.
Let me ask you something, Donna. Um, you, some people call it 12-step groups and support groups. You dealing with the issues of molestation and abuse and seeing domestic violence and those things and getting in recovery to stop, using the drugs and using you and people and everything else that comes along with it and having to maintain your sanity at the same time. How were you able to deal with those issues that was going on with you, and if it's safe for me to say, that kind of drove or maybe it's paved to you getting into drugs and alcohol for a way of escape because of the things that you had experienced as a child. How were you able to raise your daughter and still deal with it? Because some women out there may be saying, well, look, because they can be overly paranoid with the fact that I don't want this man around my child because I know what happened to me. You know what I mean? So how were you able to maintain your sobriety and make sure that you had your cat eyes out, looking to make sure that nobody's not going to harm your daughters or your boys, because it's very prevalent in with males as well, with that abuse, and still shelter them enough to say, okay, you saw your mom go through this, but I, if you didn't learn anything else from me, you learned what not to do. So how was you able to do that, shelter your kids, and still maintain all of your sanity? I mean, because you talked about a support group, but what was your foundation on? Some people say it's God. Some people, but I'm talking about real stuff. Okay, we know we pray, we know we have faith, and we know we read the Word of God or whatever our higher power is and belief is. But how were you able to, like, in real term words, how were you able to cope and deal with these particular issues that may have come up without being like a Hulk? Like,
Well, see,
and allow comfortability, allow your children to grow and be who they are and say, okay, mommy, just because that happened to you, it doesn't necessarily happen to me. It's going to happen to me.
as a mother, there was no such thing as me not being a hawk. Okay, that's normal as a mother. It's just our nature as a parent to, especially a woman, because it's our nature as women to nurture, to protect. Okay, it's a father's nature to protect his home as well, but it's a different type of protect. See, um, I always take it back to God because that's where it always begins. God placed that child, that seed into a woman's womb for that particular reason, because He also placed in that woman that protection, that sense of hawking over her child. Okay, He knew we were going to have that there. So did I have to learn to balance the natural with what I had gone through? Yes. Um, but it wasn't that wasn't my difficulty in raising my children, because I chose to stay with their biological father for since birth. I think my baby was 11 or 12 when I decided not to be with his father anymore. Okay. My oldest son wasn't his biological son, but he adopted him. Okay, and since my oldest son was one, he was his dad, and he's still to this day. My oldest son is 30 some years old, and he's still that's his dad. So I didn't have to concern myself with hawking so much over my girls and the kids. That, don't get me wrong, that natural part in me still, even though that was their dad, with certain things that I looked at and picked up on, but it was no overwhelming thing for me because my children let me know that their dad is not doing. I can watch my daughters run into their daddy's arms, and both of my girls are daddy's girls.
It's a sensing.
Right.
I know for me, like, and some people kind of say, well, how can you know that? I can see a little girl, and if I sit there and I look in her eyes,
You can tell.
There's something that people that have gone through abuse or molestation, or it doesn't even have to be, sexual abuse as a child,
Mhm.
but they're going through some type of verbal or
Some
mental abuse.
pain. You can
And
pick
you
up
can
on the
you can see
pain.
the pain that's in
Mhm.
that child's eye, and I don't even have to know that child.
Mhm.
It's just something that there's a connection, and I can see something's going on with that
Mhm.
child. And we all have different gifts and abilities that we can kind of detect, and we can kind of discern what's happening with someone. But what I really wanted to get to before the closing of this interview is how what kept. I know that it was God, but God created a world with people in it. So what connection did you have? What support group did you have to keep you going? Because you talked about the fact that you woke up one day and it quickened you, and you knew you had to take care of your child. But so there, and God does instill in every woman that sense of nourishment to be able to take care of their child, and those who are mothers, even if you didn't birth that child. Women just have that innate. We know in the Bible
Mhm.
it says that,
Mhm.
Pharaoh's daughter raised Moses. So
Mhm.
they just have that compassion there for
Mhm.
a child.
Mhm.
It doesn't have to be birth related, natural birth related. So, you know, dealing with the fact that you had those issues, because something, you were born with that. And when you first had your children, you love your children, but something got you to a direction where you went and you start using drugs. So there were some issues that you dealt with after you come out of that drug addiction, after you came out of that lawfulness that you were going through. What kept you? I know that God is the source of everything, but there had to be some people. If you can name a person or two,
It
who was
would
your
be.
support group?
This is
What would
how it
you
would
say
be.
to help someone out there that needs a support group, someone that they can trust? Because some people they have a fear of success or a fear of failure,
We
and
all do at some
yeah,
point.
so but if you had to say or give any encouragement to a man or a woman or a child, teenager today, what keeps you from those depressive feelings, those suicidal feelings, those feelings that you have to go back to what seems normal and familiar with you for you to cope. What
But
keeps you to do
that's what
that?
I'm saying to you is that you don't not have those feelings. That's all a part of living life.
Yeah, but who was your support group? Who, if you had to name a person
Okay.
or two, who did
Okay.
you lean on
First
most?
off, first off, my grandmother was the instilling factor. The things that she had instilled in me were there. Okay. Um, Once I decided not to use drugs anymore, I was pointed towards NA, Narcotics Anonymous. When I got to Narcotics Anonymous, I connected with certain people that were um, of a similar mindset that I was at, but they had already, before me, acquired some time. They had already begun to live life without the use of these drugs. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so I stuck to them for two reasons. One, because I knew that they knew how to live life clean
Mm-hmm.
without drugs, and two, because I found out through Narcotics Anonymous that the entire time, excuse me,
Bless you.
thank you. The entire time, all I was ever searching for was people to love me,
Mm-hmm.
for me to be able to fit in somewhere, for me to be able to not feel like I'm the outsider, like there was something strange about me and the perceptions and the thoughts that I had about how to live life. Okay. As I said earlier, even when as a child, when I watched my mom being abused, as a child, I knew there was something wrong. But because there was nobody else around me on a regular basis to continue to help me to grow that part of me, what happened was the other part of me grew instead.
Mm-hmm.
So once I found Narcotics Anonymous, I found those people that were going to um, help nurture that part of me that always knew there was something wrong with some man beating you up and you continuing to run back to him. Okay, it was always something wrong with you cheating with some woman's husband. I knew these things as a child, but because there was never a person there to nourish and nurture them to the fullest extent of me growing into the woman that God intended me to be, what happened was I took on the form of the only thing that was around
Familiar.
nurturing me. Okay, so that part of me that always knew never went away.
Mm.
It was just suppressed because there was nothing there to
To nurture.
bring it out. So once I got to Narcotics Anonymous and had these people around me, what they did was showed me how to start building that part up and suppressing the other part.
Amen. So there you have it. There you have it. Perfect love casts out all fear. It casts out all fear. It casts out those things that will hold you hostage and keep you believing that you have to stay in that vicious cycle of crazy. Donna also pointed out the fact that not only love, but she said that when she was a child, it was something that was already there. And even if she didn't, if you don't get that from your biological parents, know this: God has created everyone to love and to be loved. And she pointed out the fact that it was always there, meaning that if you train up a child in the way that they should go, when they get older, they may depart, but they'll come back.
That's right.
They'll come back.
That's
So
right.
let's just keep in mind that even if you don't have you don't have to know your faith word or verbatim and every single word, but if even when you're pregnant and you're holding your belly and you're speaking life and love into that child, even if that child sways, that child will come back. I thank you very much, Donna Jackson Maldonado, for being honest. And this is Be the Voice blog, and right here we're keeping it 100.